Hello, welcome everybody to New Theory Podcast. We have a great guest for you today and a wonderful guest host back again, New Theory Podcast. But first, let me introduce our guest, Ted Clark. He is the author of Shipping Clerk to CEO, The Power of Curiosity, Will, and Self-Directed Learning. Ted, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And Tom, how are you? You're back.
Good. It's a little weird to be on my old show, but happy to be here because I had to come out of retirement to hear Ted.
Excellent. Well, Ted, let's jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you got started. I mean, it's in the title of the book, but let's elaborate more on that, please.
Sure. So I live out here in Southern California and sort of grew up out here, and went to high school. And when I got done with high school, I wasn't ready to go to college. Didn't really want to go to college. In those days, I was a big skier, and I wanted to buy a new pair of skis and boots, and ended up getting a job as a shipping clerk in a factory over in Glendale. That was part of a pretty small public company called PRC, which at the time was the smallest cap company on the New York Stock Exchange. So I started there as a shipping clerk, and 22 years later, I was the CEO of PRC. And the book is just sort of that story about how for me in any event, how important mentors are to learning and advancing when you don't have the kind of college credentials and that kind of stuff.
What were your stages going from shipping clerk to where, gradually moving up?
Yeah, so I started as a shipping clerk, and I was very interested in the business, and the part of it's sort of the curiosity thing. I started to help some of the other departments, right? So when I'm driving the forklift around, and somebody wants to know where an order is, I would just go find the order, right? So I sort of took a lot of initiative without actually asking anybody permission to do it, and so I got some notice there, and went from being a shipping clerk to moving into customer service, and from customer service kind of back out into production planning, and from there back into customer service, and started to work kind of as a product line manager. Ended up as a sales manager to becoming a general manager in one of the divisions, and then from there I was promoted to run one of the company's larger divisions, and all along having really good mentors helping me sort of understand the business. Spent a lot of time asking questions, and in those days people used to kind of hang out in bars and write stuff down on the back of paper napkins, and all the different acquisitions we'd want to do and that kind of stuff. And I really paid attention, and and then I earned that sort of trust with all the things that I was doing, right? I tried to make the jobs easier for the people that I work for, and therefore they spent a lot of time helping me to develop.
And what part do you think did you have the most growth? I think I know what your answer is, but in what division of that company do you feel you had the most growth?
Yeah, I think it was the first one, right? Where it was small kind of manufacturing division, and and I had a great mentor, which was the biggest thing, right? So I had somebody who sort of identified me as somebody who had some potential, and spent a lot of time with me. And I of course you have to go out and put points on the board and get things done, and which I did, and that really catapulted me to where the corporate guys sort of heard who I was and what I was doing, and took the risk to give me another job and another job after that.
I thought you would have said the sales manager position.
I was saying the same thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. Well, I do talk a lot about this in the book, right? I moved pretty well ahead, but I got stumped on the sales thing, right? So the first go around in sales, I was a big failure. really didn't have the training, and they sent me out to do cold calling, and like sort of a month and a half later, I went back and said, look, I really don't want to do this, right? And a couple of years later, or maybe a year later, this mentor said, look, I'm going to send you to sales training. And I went to Xerox sales training, where they teach you need satisfaction selling, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with.
Right.
And it just opened a big light for me, right? I mean, it was like, this is all about listening and understanding, and then applying solutions to what you've heard, rather than trying to sell a specific product or a specific, a type of thing. And I became very, very good at that. And so I guess to your point, that's where I got a lot of stripes for, from, the ability to go out and sell, and using that technique, which fit well with my personality, and how I like to how I like to work with people.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So now the book, the whole premise of the book brings you from when you started out as the clerk, gives you a little bit of background about your history, and then drives you through your whole career from the time you became the CEO of the company. Is that correct?
Yeah. Through the time I became CEO, and for the 5 years that I was CEO, right? So it really kind of takes me to the end of what I'd call my sort of apprenticeship, right? Where I started to learn how to run a business and lead a business, develop a vision and strategy, and build a team, build a great team, and execute on our plans. And the business was really successful. Ended up getting sold to a British company, and then from there to a Dutch company. And I'd been the CEO for through that period. Sort of at that point, it was a subsidiary of these guys.
Right.
But at the end, when it was all said and done, the way I look at it is, I was sort of trained. I was sort of trained now to go out and do something, even bigger and better. And I ended up, and this is the other book on the wall. I ended up getting some private equity backing, and built a company from a thesis to about a $700 million company that we sold in 2017 to H.B. Fuller Corporation for $1.6 billion. Right. So, the work at PRC and all that, it's a little bit about sort of the lessons of, what you need to do to position yourself to be CEO. But it's also, sort of a, the start of something, right? So this whole idea of continuing to learn, and, becoming, so I was a CEO, and I effectively sort of gave up that job, and sort of started as an entrepreneur to build up a completely different company, right? But using all the skills and, the market knowledge and everything else that I'd learned at PRC.
But I'll tell you something, you were lucky that the company you were with allowed you to keep jumping to another division within that company. Because I'll tell you what, a lot of companies will hold you back because if you're doing a good job, they're fearful of losing you in that position and not being able to replace you, and they'll hold people back.
Yeah. No, that's true. I actually had that happen to me early in my career. When the first division, the guy didn't want me to leave, but I really had developed a good reputation, and there was there was somebody who wanted me bad enough where they said, "Look, I'm just taking this guy," and so I went to this other division, and and from there, it's, again, a lot of this is the networking you do within your company too, right? So, it's important to let people know, hey, you can keep me here, but I'm going to get offered from other places, and, you ought to just, try and find a way to help me kind of actualize what my ambition is, right? And I do tell people I mentor these days that, they really have to do that, right? You can't sort of let people pigeonhole you, particularly now where, people are really in demand. Good managers are really in demand at the moment. So,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was at a position when I was working for a company before I went on my own, where I would try to get out of the operation part of the company and go into the sales part because again, I wanted to move up and keep moving up, and I
Mhm.
knew that you had to go into the sales division,
Right.
right? You had to be noticed, right? And I was noticed on the operation point, and there was two bosses of mine that kind of told the sales manager, "Hey, he's with us," and they were in cahoots, and kind of held me back. And I eventually ended up leaving that company, but it was a disappointing thing to find out that that's what people will do. They'll tell you how great you are, but they don't want you to move to positions where they're going to lose you or not be able to replace you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's true. I mean, that's all. It's kind of the trick of leadership, right? Particularly as you're running these companies, is kind of retaining and building. And I tell people all the time in these businesses that look at, let's if we build a business and we make it grow, there's going to be opportunities, right? And
Mhm.
so let's do that first, so that if we do that successfully, we'll find a place for you
Yeah.
to,
And
he or she.
the other fear factor some of these companies have is, some managers may have, is teaching their underlings too much, as if they're going to be replaced. And
Yeah.
that's a weird thing to do inside of a company. Like you don't want to give them too much information and really, it's just a strange environment to be around. I was in that environment as well. Did you see that in your professional career?
You know what? There I'd say I was pretty fortunate. I ended up having like really generous mentors, right?
Mm.
And part of it, I think was I was so young when I first started, and I don't and I didn't really particularly look like a threat. I was, I'm not sure people sort of knew what to think of me at the start, and but no, I had mentors that were, I could kind of tell they were actively thinking about, well, if I leave, this is the person I think I'd like to, replace me, right? And again, it gets down to sort of relationships and sort of being honest and transparent with people about, what you want to do and sort of what
Mhm.
they think of you, right? I mean, you got to be as self-aware as you possibly can be, right? In terms
Mhm.
of, you know, sometimes you think you're better than you are, and sometimes you're better than you think, right? So
Right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
figuring it out is important.
Well, you had a lot of drive. I mean, what do you think? How do people determine their drive? I mean, how did you determine your drive?
Yeah, well, I talk about it in the book. When I was young, I lost my older brother. He
Mm.
had he was like 7 years older than me, and he came back from the Navy. Ended up being diagnosed with he diagnosed with cancer. In those days, they didn't know exactly what it was, but turned out, after he passed away, we determined, he had melanoma, and
Mm.
it was just one of those things where, it's like, geez, I've got sort of one life to live. I'm going to figure out, how I can do something really interesting. I started that sort of by kind of non-value added kind of interesting things like,
Mm.
skiing and, just sort of doing things, but it all kind of manifested itself, once I went out on the, on the shop floor, I became extremely interested in the business, right? So it was almost like, wow, I think this is what I'm kind of meant to do, and I'm going to try and figure this out. Even though I don't, I never really wanted to go back to college. I probably wouldn't, even if they would have said you can't, do this. I would have tried something else, right? But
Right.
I just don't
Yeah.
learn. Yeah, I don't learn that way. I learn differently. I learn through experiences and doing things rather than sitting in a classroom. So
Yeah. I hear you on that. Let's go back to the mentor part, and you talk about this in your book as well. You had strong mentors yourself. Are you a mentor? Do you have somebody that had followed you up in the ranks and that you took over and taught?
yeah, I have. In fact, I have a number of them right over the years, particularly like I would say the last 15 years, right? So not so much at first, to be honest with you. I mean, when I was a young CEO, I really, I mean, I talk to people all the time, so I
Right.
try to coach people when I could, but I never really had sort of specific mentors. But in the last 15 years, I've spent a lot of time, and right now I have 3 or 4 people that I mentor regularly, and got a lot of people that I informally mentor, which I think is probably almost
You know,
more
and
important.
right,
Formal.
and let's touch on that. Let's not leave that subject right now. But when you that kind of relationship you're building with somebody, you don't know if it's a mentorship, protege kind of relationship at first, and then it takes on that role where it's almost an unsaid agreement, right?
Yeah.
And
I think, yep. Go ahead.
so my point is, for our viewers, like, what are things to recognize in a person if they see somebody that they might want to get advice from? What's the first step, and how do they kind of grow that and cultivate that? If you can just give some advice for people who need guidance or want to move up and have somebody show them the ropes.
Yeah. Well, I think the more, the older I get anyway, so, maybe flattery wins, right? But I like it, when people ask me, like, they sort of ask you questions, right? So, they're coming to you to ask you questions about something, and you can kind of tell by the questions they ask, right? If they're real thoughtful questions, if people are kind of interested in how you did something or how you thought about something, right? So, when I mentor people, I really don't tell them, I try not to tell them the answers. I just try to tell them, like, well, I'd probably think about this problem this way or that way. And, you're going to have to come to kind of your own conclusion about it. But, the informal mentoring, as I said, I think it's probably more powerful than the formal stuff. Right. So, I see it with the people, they'll find reasons to come see you or talk to you. And, a lot of them will do it kind of organically rather than, the kind of corporate way where, you have a scheduled Zoom meeting every 2 months or whatever. It's people, sometimes they'll call me up and say, hey, I got this issue. I'm thinking about it this way, what do you think? Right. So, and I do think, one of the things that I've tried to do, and I think have been pretty effective, is just sort of be open, right, and accessible to people. So people, I've got a pretty open door, and even though it's a virtual door these days, people can call me whenever they want to. I was just on a phone, a couple calls today that were just sort of organic, people calling up and talking about their career and where they're at, and what are they on the right path, or should they think about doing something else, and that kind of stuff.
And at some point, yourself as the mentor, you kind of have to pick and choose who you're gonna, because it can get overwhelming. You're one person,
right?
You can't be all day, right? So you kind of have to pick wisely of those who are really attentive and are really asking questions, because
I got a question for you, Ted. So when I saw you get pitched, I got really excited. Like I said, I wanted to come on, kind of hang out a little bit, because there were some parallels where I started as a shipping clerk. I kind of accelerated through sales, through marketing, through research, and then eventually went to entrepreneurship, which I'm happy I'm out of corporate and didn't move back. But your playbook is similar, like work hard, mentorship. My first question, my quick question is: did you wind up attending college, or you never went to college?
No, I never went back to college. I did go. They sent me back to sort of an executive management course. Like they do at UCLA for you go sort of once a week for 6 months or whatever. I did that. That was really it. I mean, that was really the only one. I learned how to read like a P&L and a balance sheet from a little pamphlet that they gave me when they came over to my office, and they gave me a pamphlet because they thought I should know how to do that. And it was confusing at first, but the pamphlet was actually more valuable to me than the UCLA time, to be honest with you. And then later on, I mean, when I was, I've done a lot of PE, and you sort of end up at these sort of seminars with the PE groups, and we did one at GE one time in Crotonville, and we did one at at Harvard, and one at Wharton School and stuff like that. So there've been these little things kind of interspersed in there, but probably the biggest influence to me educationally was the Xerox training course was really transformational for me. And then and then also, kind of that little pamphlet to learn how to read a, balance sheet and a P&L.
So the reason why I go back, so I have another question, but I want to ask a question for Andrew. Andrew's a good dude. He's a friend of the show. He's going back, at school at 44 after 23 years. Things have changed. I believe he's a chef. He's reorganizing his life, right? And I haven't read the book, and Jason and I will get copies, but I'm assuming when you worked, you kind of had. I thought it was linear, like a straight line, but you worked and you build and you grew. What do you say to Andrews and the other people watching that kind of had ups, downs, personal, professional? That playbook's a little different. If you have maybe a substance abuse or you get divorced, it's hard to get a mentor. If you're out of a corporation and in entrepreneurship and you fail, there's not that like, hey, let me level up. So like, what advice do you have that's transferable to a guy like Andrew, me, Jason, you, etc., that kind of parallels what your learnings are in the book? Hey, Rob.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I have actually one of the people that I mentor was asked me sort of the same question, right? So, but she had an undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
And she was saying, look at, I want to move up, and should I go back and get an MBA? And I said, well, if you want an MBA, go back and get an MBA, but I wouldn't get an MBA just because you think that's gonna move you up the ladder, right? So, and I'm a little old school here. I mean, it's what you need to get is an opportunity to show what you can do in front of people, right? So, putting points on the board is I think the most important thing. I think going back to school, if like that's what you really want to do, right? Like, if you have, if it's like, man, I really want to, I wanted to get, a business degree, or I want to get this because it's something that you want, right?
Correct.
Whether it helps you or not, ultimately. But I wouldn't do it. I mean, well, I guess I wouldn't recommend that you do it just to, try and get the next job or whatever. I mean, it's 3-4 years, and then if you're at a certain age, you got to work during the daytime. Just interestingly enough, I mean, we my work at H.B. Fuller, where I sold my company, and I've been chief operating officer. One of the things we're doing is a thing called Talent Up, right? So we've decided we're going to train people in the company for management jobs rather than deciding that every management job requires a degree, right?
That's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, and it's because and you see more and more companies doing this now because it's they sort of degree inflated the sort of entry level management, right? So we were trying to get degreed people to be supervisors on a manufacturing shop floor when you've got really smart people on the shop floor that you can train to be supervisors, right? And then potentially managers, and potentially maybe go to sales or just like you guys did, right?
Yeah.
And for a public company, I think it's a good thing that we're trying to do, and we're doing it because we need these people, right? We're just not getting the level of competence that we need.
Yeah.
Correct.
The other thing too, when I did some research on this, there's so much emphasis on college, and it's almost like everybody goes to college, everybody should go to college for free and all this stuff, but only about 35% of adults graduate with a 4-year degree, right? So it really means that 2/3 of adults are don't have a degree.
Correct.
And you can't tell me that within that 2/3 there's not a massive amount of great leaders that need to be found and developed and given an opportunity, right? And so I just think public policy's got this a little backwards, right? I mean, what happened to, as an example, you guys would look like you're old enough to remember, shop class and, learning how to weld and all that stuff. And I tell people all the time, the best business people I know are, people I grew up with that ended up being contractors that, are now building houses all over the place and, didn't get a college degree.
Hold on, Ted. We got a curve for you. You ready for this one?
Sure.
Now we can't disclose where this guy is from, and this is real. This actually is an ex-organized crime member who moved on out of that life and is now in the process of rebuilding his life in the 50s, right? And some skills are transferable and some hopefully aren't. What do you suggest to a guy like that? He's got to start all over, away from your family, away from your friends, and literally start all over as a new person. What do you recommend to somebody like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's never too late to never too late to start over, right? And
coming, huh, Ted?
yeah, and it's kind of what I tell I tell young people, right? I mean, you have to be. I suppose if you're coming from that world, you have to be careful how you advertise what you did, right?
Good point.
But there's a fair amount of sort of management skills and people sort of understand, money, right? Understand money and cash and accounting.
Yeah,
and
correct. Yeah.
And to a certain extent, I mean, you sort of have to understand people too, right? I mean, you might have to temper your approach there, right? And but it sounds like they could be pretty influential, know how to be influential, right?
But Ted, no, but what I'm extracting from it, and that's a great answer, and I wish it was kidding, but it really was. But I love your answer. Like, you, rather than give some BS, you're like, listen, you know what? Like, when you're in that life, like, let's be honest, you need instincts to survive. You got to know how to read people. You probably dealt with people. Yeah, so maybe a management position, maybe a position in sales where you got to read people. So what I extracted from that, if stop me if I'm wrong, is you kind of look at the transferable skill, not exactly what you did, and then like say, okay, what am I good at? And then see what's out there and try to extract, and optimize that. Because I don't think just going to school is the answer, like you said. And that was I'm just saying, sorry, Jason, I'm like taking over, but that was just a really cool answer in your behalf, I thought.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is kind of splitting it up, right? Because there's on the one side, there's leadership skills, right? Which you learn all kinds of places, right? So, that's the thing I was talking about, the 2/3 of people that don't have degrees, right? A lot of them have been in the military, they've been, they've worked at a Domino's or whatever. And, they learn how to lead people, right? And you learn that by doing. And then you have what you learn in college, which is a little bit more technical, right? So you're learning something a bit more technical in college. So, if you don't, if you're coming from a place, I guess the one thing is you're probably not going to get a job as, running a dental practice or something like that, where you need to have that technical skill. But running restaurants, running, there's just all kinds of things, and those things need, real leadership skills, right? Because a lot of that stuff's not really that easy to do.
Correct.
It takes a really kind of mature leader to be able to bring in and train people and take care of customers and all that kind of stuff. And you guys know this. I mean, there's just like tons of very, very successful, restaurateurs and people running, working, where they're running like 10 franchises or whatever.
Yep.
And, that stuff, you can learn that business, but you need the leadership skills to be able to rise in that business. If you already have them, you can exploit them,
Good point.
So I got a question, a little off the cuff.
More off than that one.
I had here. So when was, I mean, we go from a shipping clerk to CEO, you sold your own company. At what point did you have the WTF moment? Like when you saw the check was whatever the amount was, a large amount. Were you like, how did I get here? What? Yeah. This is what you had to be at, like this. This is a crazy moment. Like, right? You had that moment with yourself?
Yeah. Fortunately, I've had it a couple of times. But the weird thing was, when I left PRC, where I was a CEO, I was very successful and all that stuff. But in the end, I was just an employee there, right? I mean, I wasn't it wasn't my business. I was an employee, well-paid employee and all that stuff. And then when I went, I decided to go and see if I could find private equity backers to back me in building a company that ultimately was called Royal Adhesives and Sealants. So the same industry, but a different strategy. I did a kind of a strategic roll up of adhesives and sealants companies. We did over 14 years. We acquired 19 companies and
Wow.
and put that into a integrated into a single, operating business that was, it was one of the 10 largest adhesives and sealants companies in the world when we were done with it. And I sold it 3 times, right? So I had 3 different private equity backers. So, the first time it was like pretty good change, pretty good life-changing money. And the second time we sold it, it was like, real life-changing money. And then the third time it was like, wow,
like wow, what a roll. That's
yeah,
great.
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So fortunately, I've had that, some, that experience, and again, it's nice. I mean, in the end, it's not so much the money; it's sort of like, hey, you're getting paid for the value, that you've created, right? And again, I, I had a goal after I left PRC to make enough money where I could become a capitalist myself and invest in companies, and and I've done a fair bit of that, and invest in private companies and sit on their boards and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
I mean,
great.
I would say yes.
Well, I do. So we got another friend of the show, Ali. Ali's like Jason, myself. So just to give you a quick background, Jason does private lending for small businesses, small to medium size, from 4 million to 50 million. I'm a digital marketer. I have some media properties, and I know Ali has his own business. For guys like us who have our own business, 35 to 50, that were kind of out of the corporate, and I can speak for myself. I had mentors. I kind of broke off, but there's times I still need a mentorship, right? How do you suggest you find a mentor when you're in that age bracket, but you're an entrepreneur? You're supposed to be the guy who knows everything. You're supposed to be the number one and figure things out. But how do you go about finding mentors when you don't have one at this age?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think you can, again, you can be mentored. I mean, I still, I'm working in a public company the last 4 years, and so I've used the board to help mentor me on sort of how a public company board works, right? So, that was something I didn't know before and was interested in, and they've been generous enough to help me with that. But yeah, I mean, I've always sort of, I've had the benefit because with the sort of, private equity, you've got all kinds of people to talk to when you've
Sure.
got, investors and stuff like that. So, when you like private, it's a little harder, right? I've seen people though who'll do the, like Vistage and all those kind of, CEO kind of CEO groups and stuff like that. And I think,
and all that, yeah.
yeah, and I've talked to people that have thought that's been relatively effective. It's a little bit, it's sort of clubby, right? You got to get in the club and all that, but the one thing about mentoring, and I tell people all the time, is like you got to go out and find mentors, right? Even when you're working in a company, you shouldn't just sort of wait for the mentor. You need to kind of go out and really, as that we talked about earlier, this informal, right? Just start asking a few questions and see who's going to warm up to you and answer them. And that person doesn't, go find somebody who will, right? So,
well, I also learned when I was in corporate, the 2 mentors I had happened to be my bosses that kind of stayed on, that it's kind of stayed my mentors for a while. So I think some of the biggest mistakes that I made that I now learned is, number one is your boss is not always going to be your mentor. You might get lucky, but your boss is not always going to be your mentor. So don't always assume that. Number two is have more than one mentor. Like, you have a mentor as a money guy, and you may have a growth guy and a spiritual. So like the other part I learned in my journey is to try to have multiple mentors, as well. What about for guys like Jason and I, that although we don't have a lot of time, he's got another one on the way. I have another one on the way. We're busy, but when should we start mentoring to kind of get back?
yeah, I think, like I said, I mean, I sort of went through a period when I first, was a CEO and all that, where, I just didn't feel like I had the time to do it, right? Just as you said, right? But I've really enjoyed particularly the last 5 years, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been really enjoyed it. And again, I think you just have to do it as you can, right? Because you got a business to run too, and but I think sort of giving back is it's I think the earlier you start it the better, right? Because you get a lot more out of it. I get a lot more out of it than I thought I was going to, right? I mean, I really it's made me a better operator. It made me a better manager.
Yeah.
I'm not so prescriptive anymore like I might have been 15, 20 years ago. I'm more, I think I'm more helpful to people's development than just sort of getting things done in the moment, right? Yeah, I would,
I just have like one more question, then I hand it back to Jason. Sorry for Jason for having all these questions. I got excited to be a co-host. Ali mentions he made the mistake of being friends with his employees. I've also made that mistake. I think Jay's
Me
probably
too.
well.
A big mistake.
How do you
Many times.
How do you prevent being friends with your employees?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I mean, I think you have to sort of have like sort of what do they call it, boundaries, I guess is what you talk about, right? So I spend most of my time with talking about business and talking about what the mission of the company, the vision, what we're trying to do, how we're going to get there, why it's important. And then, I'm hoping people will respond to that, but I don't spend a lot of time sort of trying to socialize with people or trying to, I like to know about their families, right? And I like to, I like to know about their kids and how they're doing, but it's not, I don't necessarily want to sort of go meet with their family and all that kind of stuff all the time, right? Because your point, you just can't do it with so many people.
Yeah.
And it is important because, there are times when you have to let people go. You have to make you have to make difficult decisions about what you're doing, and you have to in this environment right now, we're pushing people to raise prices and all that stuff because of inflation, and you have a lot of people that don't want to do it. They're younger, they've never faced this problem before, and you have to if you're the CEO or you have to do what you have to do, and to ensure that you're protecting the company and doing the right things. And sometimes that doesn't really associate itself with like being close friends with people. The other thing too is people are going to think you're picking favorites, so you got to kind of have the boundaries set up in a way that people know that you're behaving the same way with everybody and not friends with one and not the other. And particularly now with diversity and inclusion, right? You just need to make sure everybody feels like they're on the same wavelength with you, right? So I think being friendly is different than being friends, right? So being friendly, being open,
big difference.
Yeah.
That's true. And the reason why I bring it up is Jason and I are both, Italian Americans from New Jersey. It's part of the culture to, when COVID started, C-19, I don't want to say too much because then we'll really get knocked off the air or get a warning place on it. But the C-19 effort was the antithesis of the Italian culture. Be away from everybody. Don't engage. Right. Don't spend time. Don't go to somebody's house. So I think guys like Jason and I that maybe inbred, if that's a word, or indoctrinated to be culturally open with your employees. Hey, come for a drink. Hey, come for dinner. Let me take you to dinner. But I think what the pandemic showed us that you're right. You can be friendly without being friends. And I can speak for Jason because I'm friendly with him. We're both maybe colleagues or employees. There's some ways we do back off. And, I don't even have an office anymore. We decentralized our office back in 2017. We don't have the ping pong table, the flat screen TVs, right. But I do have a question again, in terms of that though. How do you have a culture of high performance in your company, but you don't need the ping pong table and the screen, the happy hours and the flat screen TVs. Those are just tools, right? So how do you maintain a high performance culture in this decentralized environment?
Yeah. Well, I think again the key is think the key with culture is not so much about it's about how you expect, what are the values of your company, or like, what are you, how do you expect people to behave, right? So, you want people to be ethical, you want people to be open, you want people to, not be afraid of their managers and all this kind of stuff. So you kind of sort of have to sort of set that up, right? And I think to me, I've never been a big, we have. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, we have cocktail hours and all that kind of stuff, and all that, right? But the reality is that
drinks.
Yeah, I mean, people don't go to the mat for you because you take them out for lunch or dinner or cocktails, right?
True.
People go to the mat for you because you're consistent, because you're not political, you're true to your word, you're sort of willing to lead from the front, right? I mean, and you guys came up the same way I did, right? So they know that, when they come back and they say, man, I had this problem with a customer, they know that I can empathize with it, right? I can understand it, but also they know they're going to get some advice on how to go back to the customer and try and get something done. So I think that's the winning culture, right? Which is like, okay, we want to win the right way. We're not going to, we're going to compete. We're going to compete hard. We're going to collaborate, but we're going to win, right? I mean, it's there's points on the board, and having a vision with a clear objective, and in our company, I mean, and you sort of, in 5 metrics, I can tell people exactly what we want to accomplish, right? And so, and then I ask them, if these are the 5 metrics, how are you helping to contribute to those 5 metrics, right? How, when you develop your vision about what you're doing in the company, and how you're going to do it, how does it impact our goals, our vision, and our goals, and how does your strategy align with our overall strategy, right? So I think that's the important thing. I mean, I was watching something on TV, with a .com thing, and all the stuff that they did, but they ended up still having a toxic culture, right? Because they couldn't trust each other, right? So I think trust is, like, I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago that trust is kind of the coin of the realm for a CEO, right? If you have a team that you trust and they trust you, you're gonna do, you should do well if you know what you're doing, right? I mean,
Right.
and the market, so doesn't completely change on you or whatever. So
Nice.
Well, listen, thank you. This was great. I had a great time, Tom. Huh?
Awesome.
So, Ted, listen, before we go here, before we wrap it up, why don't we promote yourself? How about that? Tell us what you're doing now. We know the book's out, so let's again mention the book and let everybody know what you're doing now and how they could get the book and where they could find you on Facebook. I don't know. How would you do that?
Sure.
For our
Well, great. Thanks. Yeah. So, I just, well, you may not even know this, but I just stepped down as Chief Operating Officer of H.B. Fuller about a month ago. And I've been sort of full-time now promoting the first book, Shipping Clerk to CEO, which you can get on Amazon.com. And then the Buy and Build CEO is coming out in September. And that book is the sort of the story around using private equity capital to build a global business. So
nice.
So that's what I'm doing, and I've got a family business with my son, which he's not happy that I've stepped down because I'll show up at this office more often now. So I've got to be careful to sort of let him run that, and I guess I'll go out and try to sell some books. Yeah, so
that's great. So we'll put a link to the book on this video, and we'll get that out to everybody. So Ted, listen, thanks for doing this interview. Everybody had a great time. We have wonderful comments in the comment section over here about this interview. So listen, pleasure meeting you. Maybe we'll do it again on the next run around with the next book, right? And
sounds good.
All right. Well, listen, Ted, thanks for coming. Tom, thanks for joining us. Good to see you, Tom.
Happy to be on my old podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Now.